for her. In order to plan around and teach into student goals, we have to set strong goals in the first place, and they need to meet these 3 criteria. They need to be specific, which means like they need to answer what are you doing and how are you going to do it. So if we say something like student will be able to find the main idea, that's obviously not super specific. It's not telling me how to find the main idea. Student will be like, if I knew how to do that, I would just be doing it. I don't know why you're giving me this goal. But a goal like students will be able to keep track of what's literally happening by visualizing as they read is something that is much more specific. It tells us what they're working on. So like figuring out the literal meaning or the context. It gives them a strategy that they can use to do that, which is visualizing. And right, if they realize that they're not able to do this, then I can say, whenever you're visualizing and you realize that you can't really make a picture in your mind, that's a clue that you don't understand what you just read and you need to go back, right? But it's going to be specific enough that students can understand when they're doing it and when they're not doing it. 2, it needs to be transferable. We talked a little bit about this before. I'm not making it super narrow. It's not just about finding the point of view. It's not just about one thing, but it needs to be able to transfer to other literacy components and to other genres. And so while you're writing the goals, we just need to ask, will this goal help the student anytime they're reading? If the answer is yes, then it's probably transferable. And if it's not, we just need to workshop it. 3rd, they need to be achievable. And so to make it achievable, we need to ask, is this something that we can do in 1 or 2 weeks, right? In 5 to 10 lessons. And at the end of the time frame that you set, you're going to want to make sure that you progress monitor so you can go back and see if it's been achieved or not. And so here are 2 sample goals. I'll give you a second to read them. What is in these kind of brackets here is something that you would not show students, but it's what you would use as a coach or what a teacher would use to make sure that we're keeping track of like the time-bound achievable aspect. So take a second to read the sample goals. We'll talk about them, and then I'll also give us some time to go into the goals bank. So for starting with the sample goals, what stands out to you about the goals and how is this similar to or different from goals you've already set?
Go ahead. I was just saying one thing that was different was just that the goal is naming the how of like accomplishing the goal. So that, like that by part, it does remind me of like special education like goals. So I think that's like similar, but like the how part is different. I like that it's giving students the strategy that they would use to be able to accomplish the goal.
I'm thinking about the first one in particular. First of all, they're very specific, right? And I can see a student having like a card, something where they have it every time they read through text, right? And they reread these to ensure that they're doing or answering these questions, right? Answering the steps of these questions. I like the thing that I'm wondering about is like, how does a transferable takeaway that we taught fits into this work, right? So by asking, for instance, the first one, what ideas I have about what I just read, it makes me think, does the transferable takeaway, for instance, of like knowing the difference between key ideas and details, right? Like is the work that we're doing, right, help students with these goals, right? And like I can see those parallels, even like that language, right, that can help them get there. And the only reason why I'm thinking about this is because I want teachers to make a connection, right? That the work that the skills that we're teaching our students are also connected to the goals that they have, right? Because they might ask like, well, when do students get to practice something like this? And this is daily practice, right? But it also comes back in the work that we do, that we teach, right? There's transferable takeaways that attach to these, like question the second one, for instance, we do all the time when we answer an open-ended response, right, a written response. The reason why I looked at the first one, because that one is a practice that maybe we should be doing every day, right? But the wording might be different than what we use. And so, yeah, I was just trying to link the teacher work and of the transferable takeaway with student goals.
Yeah. I think the connection you're making is a very intentional design, right? Like whatever it is that we want students to do, the thing that we're teaching them is how to do that thing. And so some transferable takeaways are like, do get more specific within lessons. But like the more generals, the more general transferable takeaways, or the more transferable ones, I should say, like across genres, could in fact be a student's goal. Right. So we don't want to take a transferable takeaway that says like, I don't know, I will use the headings, right? And use that as a student goal across 2 to 3 weeks, because stuff might not have headings all the time.
Yeah.
But goals, like you set around like idea generation or around answering the question, could very well, like that same language could be what we determine as a student goal that would be the most helpful for them.
Yeah. Thank you for allowing my rambling to like make sense. Yeah, that's, like I want teachers to feel like their work is making an impact, right? And those become like habits for students, and some students just have to do those over and over again, right? To get really good at them.
Yeah.
I think also that could be a place, to your point earlier, Kristen, around like, if it's not transferable, then it's an opportunity to workshop it. Because I think that workshopping conversation could be an opportunity for content knowledge building. Because like if a teacher does say like, oh, I think the goal should be, I'm going to go back into my, bank of transferable takeaways, and I'm going to pull out that headings is the goal that I want the student to use, right? And then the conversation is, well, like, what could that goal sound like to make it transferable into any text, right? Where like a reader might ask, how is this text organized? Right. And how can I use the organization to help me understand? Like, I think that's such a powerful moment with a teacher, where like we've struggled so long with them getting stuck in this, like, it has to be only one way. And if it doesn't fit that perfect, it doesn't fit perfectly, I don't know how to pivot. And I think having conversations in this way about how do we take this like suggestion of like using this transferable takeaway, but then make it into transferable to any text. Like I could imagine, Amy, like with your 7th grade team at Valor, like having a really powerful conversation about how you would think about, oh, right. Oh yeah, duh, right. Not every text is going to have a heading, but like every text is going to be organized intentionally. And like, what if we always alerted kids to the fact that that was the case and they knew to be on the lookout for that? Like that could be the way that we could kind of make it transferable and have a powerful conversation about it.
Yeah.
It's very workshop-y, right? And like, it has the what by the how teaching point kind of structure. And it has the like, well, let's look at the text first and talk about like, how does the text go? And then let's talk about ways that you might be able to teach into it to like, make it not just about this text, but any text like today and every day, right? Yeah. You're going to be on the lookout for the way that texts go, and you're going to be like thinking about how to tackle it.
Yeah. And so what we'll do right now is we're going to take like 2 to 3 minutes to look at the goals bank. So I made some other sample goals for you all to look at. Then we're going to look at a goal that I created for Zoe based on our diagnosis earlier. And then I'm going to give you all a couple minutes to just make a goal on your own and share together so we can feel that out. So the goals bank is in the materials that I shared. I think that's the only material that's linked. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but to give us more examples. One of the things that I appreciated that we talked about in September was that we don't want this to turn into just like, here's the list and all the options that you're going to get are on this one list and like pick one and go with it. We really want to authentically be understanding and diagnosing student needs and coming up with goals for them. But I think this gives us a nice bank to start from. So I will stop talking, give you some time to look at it. And then we'll come back and talk about Zoe's specific goal. Does this goals bank with more examples beyond the two that we studied together? Does it feel helpful? Are there, do you have notes or thoughts?
These make sense to me. I think I have more questions around the progress monitoring part and like what that might look like. But I think from a conceptual standpoint, these goals make sense to me. I'd love to hear what others think.
We're going to get really specific about progress monitoring too, so we'll see it. We'll see it play out. I'll share Zoe's goal. And then when we get a chance to practice too, I think that might like force us to confront any part of it that seems blurry, because it'll probably be hard to do on your own. And so Zoe's goal, based on the data points that we just studied, would be to identify the deeper meaning of the text by asking, what message, lesson, or opinion is the author trying to send in this text? Again, in brackets, I want her to do this with 80% accuracy after 2 weeks, but I want to see this in close reading, in instructional read aloud, and an independent reading. And so again, I'll show you how I progress monitor this goal. And to the 80% point, that just means generally, as I look through the notes that I'm going to take, 4 out of 5 days, roughly, she's mastering the goal. And so after 1 week, I'll be able to collect information about whether or not she's on track with to kind of meeting this measurable piece. And then I can course correct before I go into the second week to see if I need to adjust or give her any more supports or anything like that. But I'm able to keep my hands on Zoe's progress towards this goal pretty tightly as long as I'm monitoring her. This goal is also going to transfer across genres, right? So it's intentionally saying message, lesson, or opinion, because that could be a lesson learned, It could be a message in a poem. It could be obviously the author's opinion in any other nonfiction text. But Zoe clearly needs to train herself to step outside of the context and to ask herself this question, to remind herself to think about the deeper meaning and to include that in her main ideas. And so this goal is coming directly from what we noticed in her work and the diagnosis that we made for Zoe. Okay, so while we're in here, let's take until like 10:08. And if everyone can just think of like a student or a coaching conversation you've had or a piece of work that we've studied where there was a gap, would love for you all to just take a second and put into the chat a goal that is specific, transferable, and achievable. A sample goal. They don't have to be perfect and we can talk through them, whatever, but we're gonna have to do this in school. So we'd love everyone to try. I love everyone's thinking face. As soon as you have it, doesn't need to be perfect. We can work them out, but share in the chat when you've got one. Okay, love these. Everyone has been really intentional about including a really clear, concrete strategy for students. And Quinn, stop, it's fine. Just send me a direct message like, did I misunderstand what we were doing? I mean, that's a legitimate one though. I was like, it could have been very well something that you thought of as well. Okay, let's just look through. Also, I was intentionally not talking throughout so that you also had time to look at each other's. And so again, love that we're being really clear about strategies. Like students need strategies. The how is something that always seems mysterious. And so if we're naming that, it's not only going to make the goals easier to use, but it's also going to make it easier for us to measure whether or not students are meeting those goals in our coaching conversations. Let's just move through. So Tia, yes, answering the precise question being asked, that's going to be kind of, no, actually, I was about to say it's going to be specific to writing, but like we're asking questions all day. And we'll spend some time really thinking about what coaching could sound like across components. And so that's definitely an important target area to focus on. My push, Tia, to you would be around prioritizing the thinking work, right? I could make a checklist every time and the checklist could be terrible. And so I would push you to think through, even if making a checklist is a part of the process, how could I include something about thinking in this goal to make sure that the student knows that there's going to be a step between reading the question and like starting to scribble out a list that is going to help improve the quality of their thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about writing a little bit. Like if I was specifically like looking at some of like the written responses on ANET. And so I was just thinking about like, okay, how do I go from reading this question and then starting to organize my thoughts? And I thought maybe a checklist for how I'm going to structure my response could be a good strategy.
So what is the thinking that students need to do to be able to make a checklist that's going to help them like not miss parts of the question?
Right. I saw you already had one about going back and rereading the question. So I was like, well, they have to go back and reread like what's being asked. So then I was thinking what could be another part to it.
Yeah, or like, is your impulse around checklists because students were not answering the whole question or they were like missing parts of the question?
Right.
So it could even be something like asking myself, right, to identify how many parts are there like to this question. Mm-hmm. Then I make a checklist for that or something. But the thinking step, right? Because if I've read it and it's asking me to do two things and I'm only focused on one of those things, then I could just make a checklist and include that one thing and say like, I made the checklist like you wanted me to. And so I would just add a question that students can ask themselves that prompts them to identify like, what are the different parts of this question or how many different components does this question include so that I know how many parts need to be in my checklist. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So more transferably, I want to think through what is the thinking that is not happening that needs to be happening. When goals are only around like compliant like processes, students can feel like I'm doing what you asked me to do. Mm-hmm. And you're telling me to make a checklist and I made a checklist because the problem is the thinking. Mm-hmm. Do you want to try to revise in the chat and we can see if that feels like it's landed? Mm-hmm. And then Liz and Amy, I felt like your goals were similar, like addressing a similar issue, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I already know I would edit the second part of mine, right? And make, instead of topic, because that's all nonfiction, right? Maybe asking why are these ideas important to the literal meaning, maybe, right? Write something that would allow students to see it in all texts. I like Liz's like question that is very, I could see students kind of creating, right? Like thinking about only my key ideas. Let me look at what those are and then add them almost like a formula, right? I really like that second question, the question that she asked, that I think that's doable for students.
Yeah, I think you could even take your first question, which ideas about the text does the author emphasize or repeat? And then the second question could be, did I only include these key ideas or something like that? I think that could be a nice like merging of those two.
I didn't know if the like key ideas part made it too genre specific. I was specifically writing this for a student. I'm preparing a model for Saturday for like that is both elementary school, like for one that goes from Dibble through. And this is a student in 4th grade who like just is like every single fact from the ANET passage and like doesn't get to like the actual key ideas. And so
yeah.
Sorry, has key ideas mixed in with the like all of the facts. And so I didn't know if key ideas was too genre specific versus like Amy, I thought the question about like does the author like what ideas does the author like emphasize or repeat was more like genre agnostic, because like in fiction you could have an idea that was like repeated or a challenge that was like a concept that was repeated over and over, you know, that would be more of an idea versus I don't know.
Yeah. So I might even say like one of the thoughts I had too, Liz, was kind of like if the goal is identifying the precise main idea, that even feels too big sometimes. Maybe it could be like I will include only the most important ideas from the text by asking which ideas about the text does the author emphasize or repeat? Have I included only these like important ideas from the text? The problem we're solving for is too much, right? And it is imprecise, so you're right. But I think it's most clear. Like I think I just put in the chat. I think if the goal is about including only the most important ideas, I as a student understand. Prior to this, I've been putting too many ideas. My goal is to include only the most important ones.
Yeah.
Which feels a little bit more targeted towards the issue that you're solving for.
Yeah. I like that. That will be Jamir's goal.
And Tia, I like your.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, do it. Tia, I just saying I think your revision is like more thinking heavy than it was before.
Sorry, and I might have been off track when thinking about kind of this is more like a writing goal. So sorry if I'm.
No, you're not wrong, and we'll see. Then one of the next things we're going to do is think about how we can use this goal and target it in every literacy component of the day. So not just in close reading, but during independent reading, during writing, during independent read aloud. And so I'll show you some examples of how we can take Zoe's goal that we're working from and make sure, and like it applies. And so even if you have a writing specific goal, there are ways to coach around that type of thinking during reading heavy parts of the day that will be helpful. Focus on the big ideas in the text by asking.
Quick question, and I'm trying to make sure I understand genre frames.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that specifically like the thinking jobs in relation to the genre?
Yes.
Because I was trying to figure out a similar question or goal around like details versus big ideas of the text, because that's the number one thing that I think we're seeing in student work.
Yeah.
But I don't think the wording of this. So you guys really saw, multiple, like, thank you for humoring me as I tried so many different times in the chat.
No, do we have, I think I have one of them in here.
Yeah, I moved it or
Oh.
Or I tried adjusting it a little bit, combining a couple, because then I saw that mine just repeated what Amy said. So I tried to do it.
Yeah, I think your impulse around genre frames makes total sense, because that's one way that students can weed out, like, is this responding to the genre frame or is this tangential information or extra information? And so I think like, I don't care as much about our wording being identical as I care about the content of the goal. And that's another reason why I preface this by saying, like, this isn't going to include every single one, and you can merge them the way that we've merged some of ours in the chat. This goal says keep track of what's happening in the text by reminding myself of the genre frames, and then asking, how does what I just read connect to the genre frames specifically? But if the goal is not necessarily keeping track of what is said, but it's more about like only including those parts in the main idea, we could just change the wording of this highlighted part. But what you're describing is, wait, what are the thinking, like, what are the genre frames or the thinking jobs? Now let me connect what I read to that. Okay, I'm glad we took time to like practice doing it, because I think that's the hard part. And this is how your teachers feel as you've incorporated practice now in every single meeting, but it's really good. And to Liz's point about this as a development opportunity for teachers, the conversations that we just had with one another about our goals, I think mirror what those conversations should sound like with teachers, to really get to what is the gap that we're really trying to address here? What's the thinking that we're really trying to support students to do while they read? And how can we workshop whatever we think maybe the initial goals are, to build a teacher's capacity to zoom out and to get better at creating goals for students, and also to make sure that the student-facing goals are clear, are specific, transferable, and achievable. The only thing we didn't really think about, and I think this will come up again when we go to progress monitoring, is this bracketed portion here, because it's important. And we don't have to use percentage. We could say 4 out of 5 days, like however you want to measure it. But I do want teachers to have some understanding after a week of coaching about how close to or far from the goal students are. And are there specific components that you really care about them mastering this goal in over others?
Kristen, can we, I love the bank that you started. Could we start adding?
Yes. Do you have, I'll make sure you have edit access.
Okay. Because I would love, like, even we just added like 3 or 4 more, right? For us to have a more exhaustive list, or longer list before leaders and teachers see it. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right, so
Kristen, before we go to the next part, I have to hop off to go to this SPED hearing, and I have to be on Zoom, so I can't keep this open. Kristen, can you record the part that I'm done so I can watch it during lunch? So you don't miss anything.
Recording in progress.
And then, I'll be back as soon as I finish giving my opinion about high school special ed. With my goopy eyes, it'll be great. Great situation. So I will see you all back as fast as I can.
Okay, so let's reorient ourselves within the cycle. So we've looked at the student work already. We looked at Zoe's work, multiple data points for that. Then we set a goal for her that was specific, transferable, and achievable. We know that we want her to identify the deeper meaning by asking herself this question with 80% accuracy across 2 weeks in these components. So now we have to do the actual coaching. And so I really want to spend some time thinking through the when and the how. So first, when can we coach students around the goal that we've set? So we can obviously coach them during close reading. We can coach them during independent reading. We can coach them during instructional read aloud, during writing. Are there any other times of your day that are dedicated to literacy that I haven't included here?
No, I was going to say, like, if the ELA teacher does some sort of intervention, which I believe many of them don't, this would be another time. But, if that were to come up.
Okay. Okay, great. I was so nervous I was leaving something off. Yes, if intervention is happening, that's obviously another time an intervention would be happening specifically to support students with their goals, I would think. And so, great. And so one of the things that I'll show you in just a second is that we have to think through what coaching sounds like during each of these components, right? The way that I'm going to coach Zoe around finding the deeper meaning in close reading is going to sound different than the way I coach her around that in writing, which is going to sound different from me coaching her on that, like in an independent reading book that she's reading. And so I just need to understand the goal deeply enough to see how it transfers to each of those different components so that I'm still targeting the same thing, even though it might sound different. And I'll model that in a second. Okay, so these are the times that we want to be coaching around these goals. The biggest thing that I want, like you all as coaches to understand, leaders and teachers on the ground, is that these are not close reading goals. They're literacy goals that should intentionally be used across components. That's the way that we're going to, number one, stop the whole like, this is Lavinia and then I go to this different type of teaching. But it's also the only way that we're going to be able to like strengthen these student areas of weakness. It's like they have to see it show up across the day repeatedly and get lots of hits with the goal in order for it to be accomplished in 2 to 3 weeks. The second thing is just how do we coach students around their literacy goals? And that's through the coaching conversations that we're going to have. And so in these conversations, there are 4 kind of parts to a strong conversation. You need to name the goal. Like, student needs to be reminded of the thing that they're working on. Then the student needs to practice it. You need to give them feedback, whether that's you did great because of X, or you didn't do this well and this is what you've got to do. And then there has to be a check for understanding before you move on. What did you just do? How did it help you? How can you do it next time? And when I typically hear or see coaching conversations, 2 and 3 are usually happening, but 1 and 4 are usually forgotten. Name the goal, practice it, give them coaching or feedback, and then check for understanding. Any questions or thoughts here on the 4 parts of a strong coaching conversation?
I think my only thought is, another way that we can call coaching is like one-on-one conferences with students, right? I like the word coaching because of the definition means that we're practicing something, right? We're leaving our conversation with something, but I think also for our teachers, they don't know that word that way, right? And so another way for us to think of it is one-on-one coaching, one-on-one conferences.
Yeah. We'll get into this as well, but during the actual coaching and thinking back to Zoe and all of our students, we do want to make sure that we're setting students up to become more independent, right? So there's a way to coach with prompts that are like more hands-off at first, so that students are like have to do the stretch and have to do the thinking. And so when we think about designing these conversations, we want to start with the most independent questions and work down to more dependent prompts only when students need them. Again, something I'll show you in just a second, but the biggest takeaway from here is essentially during these conversations, the when is that they should be happening across literacy components each day. And the how is by making sure that all of these 4 components are in those conferencing conversations or coaching conversations. And this is just a graphic to, again, emphasize the independent versus dependent. So level 1, which will be the most independent, is going to be, you're going to, after you ask the student what their goal is, and they're starting to practice, you're going to ask them what to do. And so if we're thinking Zoe, that might sound like, what strategy can you use to help you find the deeper meaning of the text? Hopefully Zoe's going to tell me the question that's in her goal, which is I can ask myself, what's the lesson or the message or the opinion that the author wants me to know? If I ask her what to do and she tells me and she can do it, then great. If she's not sure, then I might prompt her with choice. So I'd say we've learned a couple of questions that we can ask ourselves to figure out the deeper meaning. I could ask, what's the message or the lesson the author's trying to convey? Or I could ask, what's the opinion the author wants to convey? Since this is a nonfiction text, which of those questions do you think would make the most sense to ask? Hoping that she's zeroing on the fact that it's going to be point of view, so it's going to be this question, and then she'll be able to take that and run with it. If she still can't, I might model. Okay, let's think back to the text we did yesterday, and let me model my thinking for how I answered this question on yesterday's text. Now you try it on today's text. If that's still not working, then I might need to be a partner, right? I'll do it on this page or for this section or for this paragraph. Now you do it on the same text. Let's do it together. And as I'm progress monitoring this, I'm going to want to include information about whether or not my coaching had to be a level 4 or whether or not level 1 coaching was working, because that's going to give me information about whether or not she's mastering this goal. If you take a second to think back to a goal that you wrote earlier, what might level 1 or level 2 coaching sound like for that goal? I'll give you a second to go back into the chat. What might level 1 coaching or level 2 coaching sound like for the goal that you wrote earlier? Yeah. Yeah, and so when you think about your support with teachers and your practice with teachers and what you see in classrooms, these kind of questions should be the first questions that you're hearing in those conversations, and then getting more scaffolded as necessary. So we don't want to hear kind of, right, I'm going to show you this right now, and then I want you to try it.
Mm-hmm.
That should be what we're going to last if the other things aren't working.
Gotcha.
And then my last question is, if you were to articulate it on your own, which we can just do verbally, what's the difference between level 3 and 4 of coaching here?
I think with level 3, there is, we allow students to stretch, right, after the model. Then they can try it on their own, right? So like they can see like step by step what we do. Now you try it. Whereas with level 4, you are side by side with the student and completing it together with the thinking that the student is not going to be able to do it completely independently.
Yep. Anything you'd add to your Corinne? Yeah, another thing that I try to be intentional about when differentiating between level 3 and level 4 coaching here is if I can use a different context with level 3 coaching, I will. Mm-hmm. Because I want to guard against students kind of just copying what I'm doing in this instance and me having the like illusion that they deeply understand it when they don't. And so if there's a text that you just read or an example that you can quickly pull from that's not the same thing as the context within which they're currently practicing, I would go there first before I jump to doing it side by side with them on the same text. Okay, So these are the two things that we just talked about in terms of the coaching conversations. It's like a text heavy slide, but it's the past two that we looked at, right? So the 4 parts of the coaching conversation: name the goal, practice the goal, give transferable coaching, check for understanding. And then just within this parts 2 and 3, practicing the goal and giving feedback, we're trying to move from independent to more dependent. And so if I were coaching a student, oh, don't do this to me here. You get to see the torture that I go through here. I'm trying to get it. Oh, okay. This is the easiest it's ever been for me to. No. You just saw that, right?
Yeah.
It's like it disappeared from me. Let me try again. All right, don't disappear. Great. So if I'm coaching a student on this, let's do. Can someone be Zoe for me?
I can.
Okay. Hey, Zoe.
Hi.
How are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited that we get to work together for a couple minutes because I've just been studying your work. I'm noticing lots of things about areas that we can work together that will just help you take off. You're incredibly intelligent. Your thinking, when I look at some of your work, blows me away. And I want to make sure that when you're doing independent work, like when you're taking MAP or you're taking ANET or you're doing a mastery day in close reading, that work is just as strong as the work that I'm seeing when we're doing work together, during like shared readings, etc. And one of the biggest differences that I've noticed is that, or one of the biggest growth areas rather, is that you really need to think about the deeper meaning of the text. And we've talked about this a little bit because it's your goal, but I really want to work with you today on how to find the deeper meaning. What do I mean when I say the deeper meaning?
Like, what is the bigger lesson that I could take away from the text that is not too text specific?
And how is the deeper meaning of any text different from the literal meaning of the text?
It goes beyond the text into a deeper level of like takeaway or understanding from the text.
Yeah, right. And it's not just about that character in that text or that scene in the poem or that specific topic in a nonfiction text. As you said, it's bigger. It goes beyond those things. And so there are going to be, right, messages or lessons or opinions that the author wants to convey to us. And sometimes I've noticed that you kind of skip over that part when you think and write about the main idea of text. And so I'm going to work with you over the next couple of weeks to really make sure that you don't forget about that deeper meaning part, because that's a really important part of understanding what you read. Okay, so I know you have this already, but your goal is to identify the deeper meaning of the text, asking what message, lesson, or opinion is the author trying to send in this text. Can you repeat that goal for me and then ask me any questions you might have about it before we practice?
I'm going to find the deeper meaning by asking what lesson, message, or opinion is the author trying to convey in the text.
Yeah, that's how you're going to get beyond the specific context of the text and really start thinking bigger picture about the deeper meaning. Ready to try? Okay. All right, so we're going to go back here to our excerpt from the text about Zuriel that we talked a bit about. And I want to practice that goal of finding the deeper meaning. So what are some places, as you just look back over this text that we've read already, what are some places that you might look for clues about the deeper meaning of the text?
I think maybe the deeper meaning could show up in the beginning paragraph or the ending paragraphs to help me with the deeper meaning.
Okay, so take a second, look back at the beginning and ending paragraphs, and ask yourself the question in your goal. What message, lesson, or opinion is the author trying to send? You practice it right now. Go back and reread the parts you told me you should. If you need me to scroll down, just tell me.
Could you scroll to the ending paragraph? And can I look at the beginning again?
Yeah. I like how you're going back. Okay, so what are you asking yourself as you reread these portions of the text?
Asking myself what the author, what message, opinion does the author have? Is the author trying to convey through this text?
Okay. Do you feel like you have a sense of the author's opinion after you reread those parts?
I think so.
Tell me.
I'm thinking the author feels that learning about other people's stories and their achievements can inspire you.
Oh, okay. Good. So when we think about, in this case, right, this is a nonfiction text right now. And so do we think we're looking for a message, lesson, or an opinion?
I think an opinion.
Yeah. An opinion on what? What is this? What is the topic of this text?
The topic is about the work of Zuriel.
Yep. And so what I want you to do is take what you just said about being inspiring, etc., and make sure that you're giving me the author's opinion about the topic.
So I think the author feels that Zuriel's work is inspiring, and it can be especially inspiring to other young people.
Okay, write that down because I don't want you to lose it, and then I want us to talk about how you came up with that idea. Okay, so let me tell you what's amazing about this. The first time we talked about this text, you didn't put any deeper meaning at all. This time I'm seeing you go back to specific parts of the text to look for clues. You're asking yourself the question in your goal, and you're fine-tuning it to make sure that you are identifying and articulating how the author feels about the topic of this text. That is the exact thing that you need to be doing in order to make growth. So you're practicing your goal and you're doing it well. The thing that I want to do before we move on is I want you to kind of reach back into your brain and tell me what you just did in order to come up with that deeper meaning.
I thought about the strategy, like, of what is the author's opinion about this topic. And then I remembered that often, like, the author gives their opinion about the topic in the beginning or ending paragraphs. And so then I was like, I reread with that question in my mind.
Yeah, that strategically going to the beginning and the end is a skill that you added on your own, which I think is really smart. what is the final piece that we really needed to work through to make sure that you were telling me the author's opinion on the topic?
I think I had to make sure that I knew what the topic was.
Yeah. Yeah, because once you named the topic to me, being about Zuriel's work, you were able to tell me how the author feels about that thing. And so that final piece is really only going to be relevant to when we're reading nonfiction, but it is important. And so big picture, what I want you to take away from this is what you shared with me around what you did. You thought about the most strategic parts of the text to go to give you clues about the deeper meaning, and you asked yourself the very question that's in your goal, right? What message, lesson, or opinion is the author trying to send? And so by doing those two things that you just shared with me, you were able to come up with a deeper meaning. You need to be thinking about what message, lesson, or opinion the author is conveying every time you read a text, regardless of the genre. That's how you're going to understand it more deeply. Do you feel like this is something you can keep doing?
Yes.
Okay. During independent reading, I'm actually going to come around and we're still going to talk about deeper meaning, but we're going to do so within the context of the book that you're reading. I'm excited to check back. Thanks, Zoe.
No problem.
Okay, let's debrief that. Where did you see evidence of these 4 parts and of the different levels of coaching?
I think by having, you went back to the first step of the 4 parts of coaching, right? Like naming the individual goal. You had the student, you reference, right? Like you've already seen this, but also let's go back and reread it. And you had the student read it so they can have that top of mind. And then you started with the process. And I think for me, like I could see this happening a lot when starting with level 1, which is what you did, right? What strategy can you use here? And hearing a student either in the moment, right? Like coming up with a strategy that makes sense, the one that we've practiced, right? Like Tia using the first paragraph and last paragraph, or students saying like the title, right? That's like a beautiful way to get to know what the student knows already, right? And start with that, with like a bank, right? Instead of like assuming the student knows nothing, right? And I like, for me, that would even inform my track. So I love how you modeled that. And for Tia, thank you for like being like authentic in what like a student would say, right? I thought like that was really evident of why we need to start with level 1.
I also was intentional about, like, for the naming of the goal, I needed to make sure she understood what I was saying. Like sometimes goals get edge-speaky and then it's like, I need to determine the precise blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so tell me like what does that mean? Or just pushing her to tell me the difference. Like, what is a deeper meaning? Because your goal is around deeper meaning, but I don't know if you know what that is. What's the difference between the deeper meaning and the more contextual parts of what we read? Which I think some goals might require like more time spent on this than others that seem more straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But even in the naming of the goal, I want to know that she understands what it is we're doing. That she's not just parroting something back to me that I gave her, that it's real and that it feels like, you know, like a helpful, authentic thing to use. Where else did we either see the 4 different parts of coaching or the different levels?
I mean, you really leaned into like the practice, like the practicing around it, and really having Tia use that goal to guide like the outcome. And then at the end you did stamp it, right? Like, what did we just do? Okay, this is what we're going to be doing moving forward, etc.
Tia, were there any parts that felt where you felt like, I'm not sure what you wanted me to say here, or like,
I think around maybe it was the last question when I was like, are you trying to get me to say that I like was clear about the topic. And I can't remember what you asked me exactly, but do you know what part I'm saying?
Yes, I know what part you're saying, because I was gonna tell you what you did for that last part, and then I was like, I shouldn't tell her. I need to get her to tell me. I don't remember what the question was either. But yeah, what was informative to me was even when you asked the question that you were supposed to ask that was in the goal, you gave me a point of view that was not about the topic, that it was kind of like veering off into like lesson learned land a little bit. And so my intention was for you to reflect on that final piece, because I'm giving you a nugget. When you're finding the deeper meaning for nonfiction, you do need to think about the topic. And so that's not going to help you with every single time. But if I'm coaching you around deeper meaning within this genre, it feels like something that's important for me to share with you. And so what I wanted you to do during that time was just to name for me the last thing that we did do that made a big difference in like the accuracy and precision of your point of view. So I agreed, it was probably not the cleanest, not super clean, but I felt like that might have been a part where you were confused. And I think as we coach, we need to be really in tune to the parts of the conversation that feel like a little bit unclear, and not to shy away from those parts, because again, authenticity. The worst thing that I think could happen is kids being like, yeah, that's what I did, and like they don't feel like they did it. And they're like, I'm not going to use this when she walks away. This was stupid.
Yeah, because I remember like kids struggle with a precise topic. And so then if they don't have a precise topic, it makes like the author's point of view very skewed. So I kind of almost feel like it's hard to be completely agnostic of the genre here, because like if we're not getting at like that part of the thinking job, then it's like it sets kids up to be able to like actually like practice that goal.
Yeah, and the vast majority of that conversation was agnostic. And so if there's like a piece you need to insert to make sure that you're giving them what they like, it's still going to transfer, and that it's not about Zoriel. But agreed. Like we need to respond to what we're getting, what we're seeing, and other students might not have that issue, even if they have the same exact goal, and we can just ask them, what strategy should you use? Great, what did you do? And so I think that kind of shows the level of flexibility we need to be, and the value of just continually practicing this when you think of developing your teachers and leaders around this. I was also, we'll see when we talk about monitoring progress, like prepared to, if Tia didn't have a strategy for where to look, I was actually going to have her just start by looking at the headings, because this is a coaching conversation. I don't want it to be super long. There's stuff in here like changing the world through film, or like a powerful force. Like there are lots of kind of point of view words in those headings that could have also given her some information about the opinion of the author. And so I was prepared to go there if I needed to give her more support. I didn't, because Tia had a different strategy that was also great, but was prepared with that strategy in case that came up too. Okay, so I recognize that I want to give us a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what it looks like to monitor this progress. And so let's do like, we're kind of weird. I'm breaking for lunch at 12, right? It's like 10 minutes okay for us to like move away from the computer and gather ourselves. Okay, so let's come back at 11:05, and then we'll finish out and reflect on the coaching process.